Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Abitchonistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong national security-oriented policies to guide the state of Israel. Thank you so much to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning in to this briefing so we can really bring you behind the headlines of what is happening here in Israel. I'm very excited about today's guest. I'm joined by Brigadier General Ari Singer, who served as the Chief Reserve Officer of the IDF from 2017 to 2021, when he was responsible for overseeing and advising on the IDF Reserve combat fitness and readiness to the Chief of Staff. He also dealt with legislation and policies that impacted the recognition, compensation, and welfare of the reserve soldiers in the Army, the Department of Defense, various branches of the government and the Israeli parliament. He is also, of course, a member of IDSF. General Singer, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Wonderful. So, we have, as we proceed with these briefings, we're always asking our viewers what type of topics should we cover, what haven't we spoken about in order to really provide an in-depth understanding of this war. And there's one topic that people keep saying you got to talk about it, and that's the ultra-Orthodox issue with regards to Army service. So, General, it's great to have you on because you are absolutely an expert in the issues of the manpower within the IDF and all of those issues. So please take it away. Can you kind of give us a background about the war, the fronts that are being fought, and the issue of service in the IDF?
Okay, let's start with a one-liner on the different fronts, because I think one of the most interesting fronts that people don't usually talk about is the internal front. In other words, what's happening in the Israeli society. So first, that we're in a period of uncertainty, and the war was quite intense until about a month and a half ago. Changing. The focal point is changing. I mean, in Gaza, we're doing mopping up operation, which isn't really mopping up. And there's a big question of how to deal with humanitarian aid. I think it should be in return for humanitarian aid for the hostages, which is not happening. On the northern front, we're in as a limited conflict, but we're actually whitewashing the term because we're very, very close to an escalation of a full war, which can happen by some miscalculation. In Judea and Samaria, they're very big, their accomplishments, but again, we're on the next week, we're going to start the Ramadan, and usually that's a very, very tense period. So actually, we're in a period of a real period of uncertainty. And if I had to give a headline of what's going on, is that how do we turn tactical accomplishments into strategic gain? And that's one of the big challenges that we have. We decided we're going to talk about the internal front, what's happening inside the army. But first, we have to understand on what foundations was the IDF built on. First, there was built on a small regular component and a large reserve component. It's one army that fights together. And in the past years, the mix between the regular component and the reserve component has become much, much greater. The second foundation was quick mobilization. In other words, the regular army has to hold the fort until the reserves arrive. The third foundation is that it's a people army. In other words, everybody serves, or at least that's what's supposed to happen. What happened over the years? First, the IDF downsized. Second of all, the IDF mistakenly thought that the era of big wars have ended. And I think the Russia-Ukraine war should have been a wake-up call, not only that we're talking about high-intensity wars, but we're also talking about long wars. And the small regular component isn't enough. If we take the average combat soldier in Israel, he did up till now close to 130 days of service. And now he's going to, until in 2024, he's going to do another at least 40 days. As a result, left in the past few years, less and less serve in the military, and a big percent of population isn't drafted. And if I can divide them into three types of people who weren't who weren't drafted is people who have a very low mark on their aptitude test, which is skills, abilities, and suitability. The second, low psychological profile. And one of the problems, you can go to a psychiatrist and then get a false certificate that you're not fit for the Army service. And the third is the ultra-Orthodox, which we talked about before, which you mentioned in your opening question. Now, the ultra-Orthodox, let's try to see, I mean, for people who don't know really what they are, I mean, what turns the ultra-Orthodox into Orthodox? So first, the Israeli term for ultra-Orthodox is Haredim. If you give it a direct translation, it means people who are terrified. But actually, it means the people who have extreme fear for God. And as a result, they see a contradiction between them going into the army for two reasons. One reason is because they believe that learning Torah, sitting and learning Torah, is something which is as important as people who are fighting in the battlefield. And the second is that they feel that the army atmosphere is something which is very difficult. It'll be very, very difficult for them to serve in an army which is a secular army. They have, try to find some characteristics about them. First, they're, aside from being ultra-Orthodox, they have big families. As a result, and they're growing a percentage of they're a bigger and bigger percent of the population. In many ways, since many of them live on welfare or some sort of welfare, they can be a burden on the economy. Their scholastic skills, on one hand, math and English and science, are quite low, but on the other hand, they sit and learn all the day. Many of them are geniuses, and what we found also in the army is they have ability to close the gap very quickly. And I think one of the most important points is they have a very critical look on Zionism. In other words, many over history, when we're talking about in Europe before World War II, many of the Zionists weren't observant Jews, and some of them were just the opposite. In other words, they looked down on observant Jews. So that's a tension we've been living with for many, many years. So that's, in a nutshell, what the Haredi, what does it mean to be a Haredi? Now, as a result of the war, we're going back to the war. There's a necessity for more soldiers. There's a term in Hebrew which I disagree with, is we have to divide the burden equally. Now, in my eyes, army service isn't a burden, and the same way I hope in most families, the father and mother don't talk about their children as a burden. Of course, it's an effort, it's an endeavor, but it's not a burden. I see serving in the army I'm proud of my service in the army, and my children who serve in the army are proud. And I think we're very, very lucky and privileged that we can serve in an army. Yes, it's an effort. Yes, it takes its toll on family life, on my business life, but it's definitely not a burden. But again, we have to, in the Israeli society, know how to divide the effort in a much fairer than what is up till now. And we can't forget that before the 7th of October and the 6th, we were still a very, very divided society. So that's, and now there are two issues that are coinciding. One, the IDF needs more soldiers. In other words, if up till the 7th of October, the question is if the army really wants more ultra-Orthodox in the army or not. Now there's no question if they want or not. It's a necessity. Now, to make things so that's one thing that's happening, but the other is for the past 25 years, there have been rulings of the High Court of Justice to solve the problem, and there were over the past 25 years, there were many laws that were made by the government, which somehow favored or somehow gave the opportunity for the ultra-Orthodox not to serve. All these laws were annulled by the Supreme Court or the High Court of Justice in Israel, and it's been a ping pong going back and forth for the past 25 years. And now, actually, it should have been in October. They had to come up with a new law. Of course, it was postponed now to the end of March. So, in other words, we have these two things, two issues which are coinciding. One is the necessity for more soldiers, and the second, the ruling of the High Court, which the government has to prepare a new law, and that's bringing politics in, which makes it much more difficult. Okay, is there any more questions or more specific before I go on to what I think is the solution?
Well, why don't we hear your solution, and then I'll bombard you with questions.
Oh, you're going to bombard me with questions. I should have put my ceramic vest.
Bombardment.
Okay. So, first, I think there's a social. In other words, it's social change. It's a paradigm change. It's a paradigm change that also the ultra-Orthodox has to do, and the army and in Israeli society. I think you can't push a social change, and it can't be done with hand wrestling. In other words, it's something that has to be. You have to build on. It has to be built on trust. Now, one of the things when I forgot of when we're talking about one of the foundations of the IDF is that there won't be any segregated units. In other words, it was very easy, thinking of all the different types of Jews that came to Israel in 1948 to build an army unit for these type, and an army unit for that type, and an army unit for the left, for the right, for the religious, for the non-religious, for those who are Jewish or for those who are not Jewish. And Ben-Gurion insisted that the army will be one army. There won't be segregated, or at a principle, there won't be segregated units. I mean, now in the American Army, in the British Army, there were once segregated units. The only countries that I know that have segregated units are Myanmar, Sudan, and Lebanon. We don't want to be at all like them. So we have to learn how to live together. I agree that Torah learning is important. I learned in yeshiva. I'm Orthodox. There are sometimes challenges to keep the different Jewish laws, but I think that the army, when I look at what I experienced and my children experienced, at the end, you can solve any problem with goodwill. So first, I think the main the solution will need mutual trust. Mutual trust means that first to be transparent, and second of all, look with a favorable eye on the needs, everybody of the needs of the other. The army has to be. In 1948, the army was supposed to be a melting pot. What's a melting pot? You take many different ingredients, stick it into a pot, and turn it into one. No, the army isn't a melting pot. The army has to be a mosaic. In other words, we have to take the different colors and different shapes of everybody and make sure that the picture that we make from this mosaic is coherent. So, as I said before, social changes take time. It can't be like a pregnancy takes time. You can't say, okay, let's rush it, and after 6 months, we had enough. We have to make very different types of service, different types of ultra-Orthodox. Now, when we say ultra-Orthodox, when we say Haredim, it's not. There are many different types of Haredim. There are people who are more Hasidic and they're more who came, or we call them Misnag, and we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty of the Haredim. It's not just one type. There are many different types. And for the different types of ultra-Orthodox, we have to build different types of service. It takes time. I think the physics are in our favor, as long as we don't let too many politics into this whole story. And I think the army grew up. I think the Haredi community is growing up, and since there is a necessity, and it's something which is so obvious, I think we'll be able to make it work.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna ask you a whole bunch of questions.
Bombard me. Okay.
Very important topic. Many years ago, I studied in a yeshivat hesder. Are you able to describe what a yeshivat hesder is for our audience, and also from the IDF perspective? Is that a good solution? Are there many accommodations? Did the IDF secretly not like the Hesder program? What can you share about that? But first, if you can just explain what that means.
Okay. First, I also learned in a Hesder yeshiva. A Hesder yeshiva, okay. In general, every 18-year-old boy or girl goes to the army for the men for 3 years. I mean, now it's a bit less. It's going to come back to 3 years. And every girl for 2 years. Now the 3-year, and that's the standard 3-year program. The Hesder is not a 3-year program. It's 4 or 5-year program, but you do a shorter army service. In other words, instead of doing the army service for 3 years, you do an army service for unless you go to command school, which is one of the things that I did. It's for about 1.5 years. But you're able to be called up. The downside of it is, of course, that you're serving less. The upside of it is that the amount of percentage of Hesder boys in the combat unit is much greater than any other population. In other words, so you gain a combat soldier. Second of all, one of the other things on the upside is that you'll be able to called into army service for the 5-year period, as opposed to there's certain laws that if you want to call somebody who's not who finished the army and was discharged, there's a certain process which that has to be done to be called in, which is quite difficult. The Hesder boys are in somewhere on call for the whole period. When I take a look at also where the Hesder yeshivas are, they're in Sderot, they're in Ramat HaGolan, they're in Kiryat Shmona. Many of them are in the borders, in Judea and Samaria. So just as they're there, it's already enhances the security because all of them are combat. So most of them, 80% are combat soldiers. In many of the shivot, they have rifles. I mean, as an antidote, when I learned in the Golan yeshiva, as there were 3 tanks in the yeshiva. I think it's the only yeshiva in Israel that there are tanks. Now, there are some people, and the whole idea of the Hesder Yeshiva is to know how to combine learning Torah on one hand and serving in the army on the other hand, in a period which is, if you can stop the world and get off and sit and learn Torah, you can stay at the age of 18 and learn for 3 years and then go into the army. But that can't happen. In other words, so I think it's a fair combination. And you get highly motivated soldiers. When you take a look now, what's going on, all the yeshiva, close to 80% of the yeshiva students were drafted in the 7th of October, and they're still in the army. So they're gaining in losses. Now, does the army, I think the army appreciates when the pressure is on and they're looking for quality, then I think there's great quality in the Hesder yeshivot. If you look at quantity, they serve less. So it all depends. Now, people who, I think real leaders look broad, and then they don't only look for how many minutes and seconds and hours you did your service, but the quality of the service. Another thing is that the Hesder yeshivot, people who learn in the Hesder Yeshiva and are very, very highly motivated, at the end, you can see in their Miluim service, in other words, in their reserves, they'll stay on even when they're at an older age, on one hand, and second of all, even when they have 6 children and they can be discharged, they stay on. So in other words, that's one of the things that we're looking into now with the Charedim to build Hesder Yeshivot, so they can do also combine both. But one of the big differences between the Haredi community and the Hesder National Zionists is that, as I said before, one of the characteristics of Haredi, they're not really Zionists by idea. In other words, the Zionists leaders weren't religious; they didn't observe the Jewish command, so the Haredim have a problem. Sometimes I'd like to give it as a parable as a bus. In other words, there was a bus of Zionism, and there are many types of Jews that got on the bus. Some sat at the driver's seat, some sat near the driver, and some sat in the back. For many, many years, the national Zionists, the religious Zionists, were sitting in the back seat, and somehow they're getting close and closer to the driver. I think the Haredi community, which has a lot to contribute to the country and to contribute to the army, they didn't get on the bus, but they were driving in the car right next to the bus. So I think again, one of the things that we learned from October 7th is to look with empathy on all types of Jews. In other words, we were in such a bad situation of fighting with each other. I think one of the wake-up calls that we got is not, unfortunately, it was done by the enemy, but I think we should look how to be much more cohesive and look at the good traits of each and every person who lives in Israel, and not just look out to fight. Okay, that was an easy question. Let's go to the next one.
So again, in keeping with that Hesder model, meaning in order for Hesder to work, the IDF had to make accommodations. They had to change the rules in terms of how long a boy serves. Do you think there is willingness right now in the IDF to sit down with the Haredi community, whatever that means, the ultra-Orthodox community,
okay,
and make an accommodation, change the length of service or the type of service,
okay,
in order to strike a deal?
So I think to strike a deal, it's not only the length of service, I think it's also the type of service. On one hand, there has to be some segregation because they eat only, I don't want to say ultra kosher food, but it's I think the Hesder boys who live in the Israeli society aren't afraid to deal with even ideas which contradict the ideas of the person who's sleeping in the bed next to you. The Haredi, many where they're living in very close-knit communities. Most of them never even spoke to a non-religious, a non-Haredi person. There are issues of modesty, issues of culture. It's not only the question of the amount of time, but the environment that we build. And I think we have to build many, many different environments. There is a battalion of Haredi soldiers, which is called Netzach Yehuda, which is a very good battalion. There are some companies in Givati and some companies in Tzalchanim, and I think the way it should be also in the armed forces. We're talking about building a company. There are some Haredi who because of we're not going to get into because of their lifestyle, chances are they're going to be drafted into the army at an older age after they're married. Here we have to find some other accommodations. In other words, build them a service where let's say there'll be drivers of trucks. It'll also give them a profession. There are many, as I said before, since they can learn math and English very, very quickly. There are some who will serve in day jobs in intelligence. In other words, we have to build. It's not one size fits all. It's not take all the Haredim and make one make one type of service. No, we're gonna have to have a deep appreciation and deep understanding of the ultra Orthodox community, and we're going to have to build many different types of service to accommodate the different types of Haredim. It's simple. You just need goodwill. If we have goodwill on our side, goodwill on the Haredi side, stick in the necessity, and hope that it's possible. I mean, I've been working on this for many years. Again, with goodwill, everything with goodwill and trust. And since, like everything in life, there'll always be mistakes done. From mistakes we learn, and it's legitimate. That's life. Not to do the same mistake twice. And we have to build again. We have to build with goodwill and trust, and understand that social change takes time. I think the problem can be solved, and I'm optimistic.
It's wonderful to be optimistic, and thank you so much for sharing all of this.
And realistic.
It's an important combination. I'm wondering if you can comment on, there were reports that after October 7th, the number of ultra-Orthodox who were signing up for IDF service went up. Is there a truth to that? Do we have information on that, on what happened?
Yes, we have information. There are about 700 soldiers who went to what's called Stage B. But Stage B, they did a 2 or 3 week service, and they're going to be put in the reserves. In other words, they're not qualified for much. Many of the time, we're going to take they're going to take their civilian skills and find something in the army that they can do. Last draft of the 18, 20-year-olds to combat units was lower than usual, which it's upsetting. But many people say, okay, what's it worth if a guy went 2 weeks to the army? What kind of soldier can he be? But that's looking at quantity and not at quality, because this soldier came home. In the weekend, he came home with a uniform. His children saw him in uniform. His neighbors saw him in uniform. He feels that he wanted to serve in the army. That can be a start. In other words, one of the things that we're going to have to do is that army service is legitimate for a person who's not sitting as some in yeshiva and learning. And there even today, there's so many a vast percent of the Haredi who don't sit and learn the whole day. It's difficult to sit and learn. It has to be. We have to turn this service to something which is legitimate. So even though it's only 2 weeks, I still think it's worthwhile.
For sure. Brigadier General Ari Singer, thank you so much for sharing all of this. We can tell by the feed in the comments that people are very much appreciating and learning a lot. And I feel like if we had another 2 hours, you could really give a whole deep dive in Army service in general, because most of our viewers from the other side of the ocean aren't familiar with so many of the nuance, which means we're going to have you join us again. Do a future briefing where we can share more details. But I'm optimistic based on what you are saying. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, of course, to all of our viewers and supporters. We will be back with you 10 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Until then, stay safe, stay strong, take care.